My mother told me with a completely straight face that I was dead to her. Not that she was angry, not that she needed time. She said the words, "You are dead to me," while standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, holding a dish towel like it was the most normal sentence in the world. My father did not look up from his chair. He just nodded, slowly, like they had already decided before I even walked in. I had not stolen anything. I had not hurt anyone. I had not done something shameful or illegal or cruel. I had told the truth about one thing, one single truth that was right there in black and white, and that truth had destroyed the version of our family that they had been building for years. That was the night I understood that some families do not want honesty. They want loyalty to the lie. And the moment you stop protecting the lie, you stop being family. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something real. Not about whether what I did was right or wrong, because honestly I have asked myself that 1,000 times. But this, if you had proof, actual, undeniable, documented proof, that someone in your family had been lying to everyone for years, and that lie was quietly hurting people who trusted them, would you say something, or would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Think about that. Because the answer I gave changed my entire life. Stay with me, you need to hear how this ends. My name is Anna, and I am going to tell you something that took me almost 3 years to be able to say out loud without my voice shaking. I was disowned by my parents for telling the truth. Not a mean truth, not a spiteful truth, not a truth I dug up to hurt someone. A truth that was sitting right there in a document, in a number, in a record that anyone could have found if they had looked. I looked, I found it, I said it, and my parents chose the lie over me. That is the short version. The long version is the one that will make your jaw drop, because the truth I told was only the beginning. What came after, what I found once I started looking, that is the part that kept me up at night. That is the part that changed everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, not the beginning of my life, the beginning of the thing that broke it open. It started with my grandmother's house. My grandmother, her name was Elsa, passed away when I was 27. She had been sick for about 2 years, slowly, quietly, the way old people sometimes go. She was in her 80s. She had lived a full life. Her death hurt, but it was not a shock. What came after her death was the shock. Grandma Elsa had a house. A real house. A proper, paid-off, 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood that had gotten nicer over the decades. By the time she passed, that house was worth somewhere between $340,000 and $370,000, depending on who you asked. It sat on a corner lot. It had fruit trees in the backyard. I had spent summers there as a child. I knew every room. The house was, as far as every single person in our family had always been told, going to be divided equally among her 3 children when she died. Her 3 children were my mother, my uncle Dennis, and my aunt Patris. Equal thirds. That was the plan. That was what Grandma Elsa had said, more than once, at more than one holiday dinner, in front of more than one witness. Equal thirds. I want you to hold on to those 2 words, because they matter. My grandmother had hired a lawyer years ago to draw up her will and handle her estate. His name was Mr. Carver. He was a quiet man, semi-retired, who had handled legal work in our small city for decades. He had been Grandma Elsa's lawyer for over 20 years. He knew the family. He knew the plan. He sent a letter to my mother 6 weeks after the funeral, asking her to come in with her siblings to begin the process of settling the estate. What happened at that meeting is something I was not told about for a very long time. My mother came home from that meeting looking strange. I noticed it because I was staying with my parents at the time. I had been helping them out, running errands, checking in on my dad who had some health problems that year. I was there when she walked through the door. Her face was flat, controlled, the way her face got when she was working very hard not to show something. I asked her how it went. She said fine. I asked what happened. She said it was just paperwork. I asked if there was a timeline for the house. She said these things take time. I believed her, because she was my mother. Because I had never had a real reason not to believe her. Because in a family where everyone is supposed to be honest, your first instinct is always to believe. 3 months passed. I moved out, got back to my own apartment, my own life, my own work. I am a graphic designer. I work mostly remotely. My life is quiet and organized, and I have always preferred it that way. During those 3 months, I called my mother every week like I always did. She never brought up the house. I assumed the estate was just moving slowly. Then I had dinner with my Aunt Patris. Patris is my mother's younger sister. She is warm, a little scattered, and deeply trusting. She brought up the house herself, and what she said stopped me cold. She said the house had already been sold. She said my mother had handled everything, which was wonderful of her because Patris had never been good with paperwork. She said my mother had worked directly with Mr. Carver to complete the sale quickly and efficiently, and that she and Dennis had each received their share. I asked how much. Patris told me she received $42,000. I nodded, I kept my face calm, but inside something was pulling very tightly. I did the math in my head while she was still talking about how grateful she was that my mother had handled it all. If the house sold for around $350,000, a reasonable middle estimate, and there were 3 equal thirds, that would mean each sibling should have received somewhere around $116,000, maybe a little less after fees and taxes, but definitely not $42,000. $42,000 was not a third of $350,000. $42,000 was not even close. I smiled and changed the subject. I drove home. I sat in my car in my parking lot for 20 minutes before I went inside. I told myself I was probably wrong, that there were fees I did not know about, that estate costs were high, that maybe the house sold for less than I thought, that there was an explanation. There is always an explanation. But the number would not leave me alone. I am someone who likes to understand things. I always have been. I do not enjoy sitting with confusion. I am not a suspicious person by nature, but I am an organized and logical one. So I did what a logical, organized person does when a number does not add up. I looked it up. Property sale records are public in most places. It took me about 15 minutes on the county assessor's website to find the record of the sale of Grandma Elsa's house. It sold 8 weeks after the estate meeting. The recorded sale price was $348,000. I sat there with that number in front of me for a long time. $348,000, divided equally into thirds, minus reasonable estate fees, should have given each sibling somewhere around $105,000 to $115,000. Patris received $42,000. Dennis, when I called him 2 days later with a careful, casual question about whether everything had gone okay with the estate, told me he received $43,000. So Patris and Dennis together received $85,000. The house sold for $348,000. $85,000 and $263,000 do not add up to $348,000. The gap was enormous, and there was only one person who had handled the paperwork. Only one person who had worked directly with the lawyer. Only one person who had controlled the entire process from beginning to end, while her 2 siblings, both of whom trusted her completely, thanked her for being so helpful. My mother. I want to be very careful here because I know how this sounds. I know that I could have been wrong. I know that there could have been fees I was unaware of. I know that numbers can tell partial truths. I also know that I am her daughter and that accusing your own mother of something like this is not something you do lightly. I spent 2 more weeks going back and forth with myself. I lost sleep. I made lists. I wrote down every possible innocent explanation and tried to believe each one. But there was one thing I could not get around. $85,000 versus $263,000. Even if you accounted for significant legal fees and estate costs, and I looked up what those typically run, the numbers still did not close. Not even close to close. So I called Mr. Carver's office. I told his receptionist that I was a family member of the Elsa who had recently passed and that I had a question about the estate. She was polite. She put me on hold. Mr. Carver himself came on the line within a few minutes, which surprised me. He sounded elderly and a little tired. I introduced myself. I told him I was Anna, Elsa's granddaughter, and that my mother was one of the beneficiaries. I told him I was not calling to cause any problems, but that I had a question about the distribution of the estate. I asked if he could confirm what the net distribution had been after fees. There was a pause on the line, a long one. He said he was not sure he could discuss those details with me, since I was not a named benef. I said I understood that. I asked if he could just confirm, in general terms, whether the distribution to all three siblings had been equal as specified in the will. Another pause. He said the will had specified an equal distribution among the three children. I asked if the distribution had matched the will. He said that was a matter between the beneficiaries and the estate. He was being careful. I could hear it in his voice. He was not lying, but he was not comfortable either, and the discomfort in his voice told me more than his words did. I thanked him and hung up. I sat with everything I had learned: the sale price, the amounts Patris and Dennis received, the lawyer's careful discomfort, the way my mother had controlled the entire process, the way she had deflected every question I had asked her about it. I called my closest friend, whose name is Diane. Diane is a paralegal. She has been my friend since college, and she is one of the most grounded, clear-thinking people I know. I laid out everything I had found: the numbers, the website record, the call with Mr. Carver. I asked her to tell me if I was being paranoid. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Anna, I think you need to see the actual estate documents." She explained that in our state probate records, the documents filed with the court during the estate settlement process are part of the public record. They are accessible. They list the assets, the debts, the fees, and the distributions. She told me exactly which courthouse to visit and what to ask for. I went the next morning. It took about an hour of waiting and a small copying fee. But I walked out of that courthouse with 31 pages of documents that laid out every detail of my grandmother's estate settlement. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and read every page. By page 12, my hands were shaking. The estate had been settled with total net proceeds, after legitimate fees, taxes, and outstanding costs, of $301,000. $301,000 to be divided equally among three beneficiaries. Each beneficiary's equal share should have been exactly $100,333. Patris received $42,000. Dennis received $43,000. Those amounts were right there in the documents, confirmed. And my mother, listed by her full legal name on page 14, had received the remainder: $216,000. She had taken $216,000 from her own mother's estate, from money that was supposed to be shared equally with her two siblings, who trusted her entirely, who thanked her for managing everything, who never once thought to question the woman who had handled all the paperwork. I do not have a word for what I felt sitting in that parking lot. It was not anger, exactly. It was something quieter and colder than anger. It was the feeling of a floor disappearing. It was the feeling of looking at a person you have known your entire life and suddenly seeing the shape of something hidden inside them that you never knew was there. I called Diane. I read her the numbers. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Anna, this is serious." I knew it was serious. I just did not know yet what serious was going to cost me. I took the documents home. I made copies. I put the originals in a folder in my filing cabinet. I put copies in a second location. I had learned from Diane that what I was looking at had a name. It was called a breach of fiduciary duty. In some interpretations, depending on how the discrepancy had been achieved, it might be called something worse. The beneficiaries had the right to contest this. There was a legal window to do so. And I was the only person in the family who knew. For exactly 1 week, I knew and I said nothing. I spent that week trying to decide what kind of person I was going to be. This is not an easy decision. My mother was my mother. She had raised me. She had packed my lunches and driven me to school and sat up with me when I was sick. I loved her in the way you love someone who has been part of every moment of your life. And she had also stolen, there is no softer word for it, stolen $216,000 from her own siblings who trusted her. What do you do with that? I thought about staying quiet, about telling myself it was not my business, about letting it be something I knew privately and never mentioned. I would be protecting the family, keeping things smooth, making sure no one got hurt. But every time I thought that, I thought about Patris. Sweet, scattered, trusting Patris, who had thanked my mother for being so helpful. Patris, who lived in a small apartment and worked a modest job and had just believed, without question, that 42,000 was her fair share. Patris, who would never have known the difference. See? And I thought about what it meant to know this and say nothing, what it made me if I stayed quiet, not a peacekeeper, not a loyal daughter, a silent accomplice. I could not be that. I decided I would tell my mother first, privately, give her a chance to explain, and if there was no explanation, a chance to fix it before it became something legal and public. I am not someone who wants to blow things up. I wanted to give her a way out. I called and asked if I could come for dinner. She said yes. I drove over on a Tuesday night. We ate, my father was there. We talked about normal things, my dad's health, a neighbor's renovation, a show my mother was watching. It was comfortable and ordinary, and I kept thinking this might be the last ordinary dinner we ever have. After dinner, when my father had moved to his chair in the living room and my mother was cleaning up in the kitchen, I followed her in. I told her I had been to the courthouse. She turned around slowly. Her face changed in a way I had never seen it change before, not surprised, not confused, caught. I said I had the probate documents. I told her I had seen the distributions. I said her name, and I said the number, 216,000, quietly, just between us. She set the dish towel down. She told me I did not understand how these things worked. She told me there were expenses I did not know about. She told me she had spent an enormous amount of time managing everything and that time had value. She told me she had advanced some money for funeral costs and had been reimbursed from the estate. She said it all very quickly and very smoothly, the way someone says things they have already prepared. I waited until she was done. Then I said that none of what she described was in the probate documents, that the fees listed in the documents were legitimate and accounted for, that there was no record of any advance or any management fee, that the documents showed a straight misallocation of funds that did not match the terms of the will. The room went very quiet. My mother looked at me for a long moment, then she walked to the doorway of the kitchen. She called my father's name. He came in, she told him what I had just said. Not accurately, she framed it as me accusing her of stealing, which was not exactly how I had put it, but close enough that I did not interrupt her. My father listened. Then he looked at me. He said, "You're going to destroy this family over money." I said I was not trying to destroy anything. I said I wanted to understand what had happened, and I thought Dennis and Patris deserved to know. My father said that if I told Dennis and Patris, I should not come back. I looked at him, I looked at my mother, neither of them said anything else. I picked up my keys, I said I was sorry it had come to this, and I left. I cried in the car. I will not pretend I did not. I cried the whole drive home and then I sat in my apartment and cried some more, because I had just understood something that hurt in a very specific way. My parents had not asked me if I had gotten the number right. They had not asked to see the documents. They had not said, "Let us look at this together and try to understand." They had immediately and without hesitation chosen the secret over me. They had chosen the money and the lie over their own daughter, who had come to them privately and asked for an honest conversation. That told me everything I needed to know. I gave myself one night to grieve it, one night, and then the next morning I called Diane. I told her what had happened. I told her my parents had essentially confirmed it by not denying it and by telling me to leave and stay away. I asked her what Patris and Dennis's options were. Diane said they could contest the estate distribution if they acted within the legal window. She said the window in our state was 1 year from the date of the final distribution filing, and that filing had been made 7 months ago. There was still time, but not a lot. She also said, very gently, that this was their decision to make, not mine. My job was to give them the information. What they did with it was up to them. She was right. I called Patris first. I asked if I could come over. I brought the documents. I sat with Patris at her kitchen table and I showed her, page by page, what had happened. I explained what each column meant. I showed her the listed amounts. I showed her the total. I showed her her name and her number and my mother's name and my mother's number. Patris did not say anything for a very long time. Then she started to cry. And not the small, quiet kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and takes a while to pass. When she could speak again, she said, "She managed everything, I trusted her, she kept telling me how much work it was." I reached across the table and held her hand. I said, "I know, I'm sorry." I called Dennis separately that evening. Dennis is elder and quieter and more measured. He listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me to send him copies of the documents. I said I would. He said thank you. Then he said, "How did your parents react when you told them?" I told him, the whole thing, the kitchen, my father's warning, the choice to keep the secret over keeping me. Dennis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I always wondered if something was off. The number felt wrong. But she was so confident. And she was your mother. You don't question your sister when she's handling your own mother's estate." "No," I said, "you don't." What happened over the next 6 weeks was both slower and faster than I expected. Dennis and Patris together hired an estate attorney. His name was Mr. Fonseca, and Diane had actually worked with him before and spoke highly of him. He reviewed the documents I had provided along with the official probate record. He confirmed everything I had seen. He said the discrepancy was clear, it was substantial, and it was actionable. He sent a formal letter to my mother. I was not there when she received it. I was not privy to her immediate reaction, but I heard about it through a chain of people within about 48 hours. My mother apparently called every family member she could reach, aunts, cousins, family friends, and told them that I had poisoned Patris and Dennis against her, that I had manipulated them, that I had taken a difficult and complicated estate process and twisted it into something ugly out of spite, that I had always been jealous and difficult, and this was the result. She did not mention the $216,000. She did not mention the probate records. She did not mention the terms of the will. She told the story with herself as the victim and me as the villain, and she told it first, and she told it loudly. Within a week, I had received messages from 3 cousins, 2 aunts, and my parents' longtime neighbor, a woman who had known me since I was 7 years old, all telling me some version of the same thing, that what I had done was shameful. That family was family. That I had hurt my mother deeply. That money was not worth destroying a family over. None of them asked to see the documents. Not one. This is the part that broke something in me in a different way than the original discovery had. The first break was the discovery itself, my mother's betrayal of her siblings. The second break was my parents immediately choosing the secret over me. But the third break, the one that left the deepest mark, was watching an entire extended family absorb a false narrative without asking a single question, without wanting to know, without a moment of, wait, what are the actual facts here? They did not want the facts. They wanted the version that let them stay comfortable. I stopped responding to those messages. Not angrily, I just stopped. I had said what I needed to say. I had put the documents in the right hands. The legal process was moving. I had nothing left to defend or explain to people who had already decided. But I will be honest with you, those weeks were lonely in a way I had never experienced before. I had grown up in this family. These cousins were people I had known my whole life. These aunts had held me as a baby, and they were all, one by one, closing a door in my face because of a story my mother had told them first. The only people who were consistent were Patris and Dennis. Patris called me almost every day, sometimes just to talk about nothing, I think because she did not want me to feel alone. Dennis sent me a text every few days. Short, practical things, just checking in, letting me know where things stood. Diane kept me sane. She would sit on my couch on Friday evenings and let me talk, and then she would say something dry and logical, and it would help. My parents did not contact me, not once. Not a text, not a call, not a voicemail, nothing. The silence was complete. I had lived my whole life being close to them, checking in, showing up, being present, and the silence from their direction was enormous. I noticed in those weeks how much of my energy over the years had gone toward being a good daughter, toward being available, toward being the one who helped. I had been at my dad's doctor's appointments. I had painted their guest room. I had helped my mother organize her closets, plan birthday parties, navigate insurance paperwork. I had been there constantly, dependably, without being asked. And the moment I had told one difficult truth, I was gone. I was dead to her. That was her word, dead. I had given years of consistent, quiet love, and it had been worth exactly as much as my willingness to protect their secrets. That realization did not come with bitterness. It came with clarity. Cold, clean, clarifying clarity. Meanwhile, the legal process was moving. Mr. Fonseca had sent the formal letter. My mother, D hired her own attorney, which told me she was taking this seriously. For about 3 weeks, the attorneys communicated back and forth. My mother's attorney apparently tried several arguments: management costs, reimbursements, time value, all the same things my mother had tried to tell me in the kitchen. Mr. Fonseca, working from the probate documents, systematically addressed each one. There were no management fees listed in the probate record because they had not been disclosed to the court as required. There were no reimbursement agreements filed. The distribution simply did not match the will. Then something happened that shifted everything. Mr. Carver, the elderly, semi-retired lawyer who had handled the estate, apparently received a call from Mr. Fonseca requesting any correspondence between himself and the estate beneficiaries during the settlement process. Mr. Carver, who I think was not a dishonest man, and who had been carrying something uncomfortable since that first phone call I had made to him, chose to cooperate fully. He provided email correspondence. In those emails, and this is the part that made even Diane go quiet when I told her, there were multiple exchanges between my mother and Mr. Carver in which she had directed the distribution amounts. She had told him how much to send to each sibling. She had framed it as accounting for various costs and contributions. Mr. Carver had apparently followed her instructions without independently verifying them against the will's requirements, which was his own professional failure, and something he acknowledged to Mr. Fonseca. The emails made clear that my mother had not made an accounting error. She had made a deliberate instruction. When those emails entered the picture, my mother's legal position collapsed almost immediately. Within 10 days of Mr. Fonseca receiving that email correspondence, my mother's attorney contacted him to discuss resolution. 2 weeks after that, a settlement was reached. I was not part of the negotiation. It was between Patris, Dennis, their attorney, and my mother. But Patris told me the result. My mother agreed to repay the discrepancy, the amount she had taken beyond her equal share, plus interest and legal fees. She agreed to do it in structured payments over 18 months because she did not have it all available in cash. The settlement was binding and legally documented. Patris told me this on the phone and then she cried again, not the same kind of crying as before, quieter this time, more tired. I never wanted this, Patris said. I just wanted my fair share of our mother's house. I know, I said, you deserved it. There was a pause. Thank you, Anna, Patris said. You didn't have to do any of this, you could have just stayed out of it. And that is true, I could have stayed out of it. I could have done the math in my head at that dinner table with Patris, smiled, let it go, kept my quiet life intact, kept my parents, kept the cousins, kept the aunts, kept the neighbor who had known me since I was 7. I could have protected all of that by just not looking too hard, not going to the courthouse, not making the call. I chose not to. And it cost me nearly everything. But here is where the story takes one more turn, because it is not done, not quite. 2 months after the settlement, I received a phone call from my mother. Not a voicemail, a call I almost did not pick up. I sat and watched my phone ring for a long moment. Then I picked it up because I thought there might be a practical reason: my father's health, something with their house, something that needed to be handled. My mother's voice on the line was different from what I expected. Not warm exactly, but not hostile. Careful. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She said she wanted to talk. I asked about what. She said about things, about where we were. We talked for almost 40 minutes. It was one of the most uncomfortable conversations I have ever had in my life. She did not apologize, not in a direct way. She talked about how the whole situation had been very difficult and how she felt she had contributed significantly to her mother's care in her final years, and that she had believed she deserved to be compensated for that, and that she had not handled it the right way. That was the closest she came. She had not handled it the right way. I noticed that there was no part of the conversation where she said she was sorry to Patris or Dennis. There was no acknowledgement of what it had actually been, of the word that fit the action. She talked around and around the thing and never landed on it directly. I listened to all of it. I did not argue, I did not correct her framing, I just listened. At the end, she asked if I would come for dinner soon. I said I needed to think about that. She said she understood. I did not go for dinner that week, or the next. I called her once about a month later to check in on my father who had a doctor's appointment. The call was about 15 minutes. Practical, distant. That was how things stayed for a while. Because there is something that nobody tells you about moments like this. They do not end with one dramatic scene. There is no single moment where everything is resolved and you know exactly where you stand and what the relationship is going to be going forward. There is just a slow, quiet recalibration, a shift in what you are willing to carry and what you are not. I was no longer willing to carry the pretense that everything was fine. I was no longer willing to show up and be the helpful, available, cheerful daughter who smoothed over the uncomfortable things and made it easy for everyone to not look at what was real. I had been that person my whole life, and it had served the family more than it had served me. I still spoke to my parents. I was not interested in a total and permanent cut. My father especially, whatever he had chosen in that kitchen, was still my father and was still getting older, and I was not someone who could simply erase that. But the version of our relationship that existed before that Tuesday dinner, that was gone. That could not exist in the same way anymore once I had seen what I had seen. What replaced it was something smaller, cooler, more honest. And I found, slowly, that I could live with that. The cousins were a different matter. Several of them eventually learned the full story as the settlement became something that was hard to keep quiet in a family where everyone talks to everyone. The reaction was mixed. Some people quietly distanced themselves from my mother. A couple of cousins reached out to me with some version of, "We had no idea, we're sorry." One cousin, the one who had sent me the harshest message, never said a word to me either way. Just went silent. The aunts mostly did the same, said very little, recalibrated quietly. The neighbor who had known me since I was 7 called me, about 4 months after everything, and apologized. She said she had only heard one side and she should have waited before sending that message. It was a short call, but a real one. I told her I appreciated it and meant it. Patris and I became closer. That was an unexpected and genuine gift inside everything. We had always been fond of each other, but in that distant way of extended family, where you see each other at holidays and the love is real but the knowing is shallow. After all of this, we knew each other better. She started calling just to talk. I started calling back. We had dinner a few times, just the two of us. It was one of the things that had come out of something painful and turned into something true. Dennis stayed Dennis, consistent, practical, not big on emotional conversations, but warm in his own way. He sent me a gift card to a restaurant I liked around the time the settlement was finalized, with a note that just said, "Thank you for being honest." That was Dennis in total. It was enough. My work continued. My life continued. I kept designing, kept waking up, kept making my coffee in the morning and reading in the evenings and meeting Diane on Fridays. The shape of my days had not changed, but I had changed inside them. There is something that happens when you tell a hard truth and it costs you. Something shifts in how you understand yourself. Before that Tuesday dinner, I had a fuzzy, comfortable idea of myself as someone who was honest and good and thoughtful. I believed it without having ever really tested it. And then I tested it, and it was expensive, and I still did it, and I found out that it was actually true. That I was actually someone who would tell the truth even when it cost her. That knowledge, that specific, tested knowledge of who I was not something anyone could take from me. Not my mother's narrative, not the cousin's messages, not the silence from my father's chair. None of it could reach that thing I now knew about myself. There is also something that happens when you stop being the person who protects everyone else's comfort at the cost of your own integrity. Something quiets. Some background noise that you did not even know was always running goes silent. I had spent so many years managing the atmosphere around my parents, making sure things were pleasant, not bringing up uncomfortable things, being the daughter who was always there and always easy and always helpful. It had felt like love, and it had been love, partly, but it had also been a performance. A long, exhausting performance for an audience that would boo me off stage the moment I went off script. I stopped performing, not dramatically, quietly, I just stopped. And what I found on the other side of that performance was a quieter, smaller, more honest version of my family relationships, and a life that felt more genuinely mine. Now let me tell you about the thing that happened 8 months later, because I did say this S. Tori had one more turn, and I meant it. My father got sick, not a small sick, a real illness, a cardiac event followed by a hospitalization and then a recovery period that was going to require significant care and adjustment. It was serious and it was frightening, and for a week, while he was in the hospital, everything else fell away and I was just his daughter. I showed up at the hospital. Of course I did. My mother was there. We sat in the same waiting room, drinking bad coffee, speaking in practical sentences about his medication and his doctors and what the cardiologist had said. It was the most time we had spent in the same room since that Tuesday dinner a year before. At some point on the second day, when my father was stable and sleeping, and my mother and I were the only two people in the family waiting area, my mother looked over at me. She said, "I'm glad you're here." I said I was glad he was okay. She said, "I mean in general, I'm glad you're still here in our lives." I looked at her. I tried to read what was behind that statement, whether it was the beginning of something real or just the fear of the moment talking. I still do not know the full answer to that. I am not sure it matters, because what I said back was true regardless of her motivation. I said, "I'm not going anywhere, but I can't be who I was before either." She nodded, very slowly, and then she looked back at my father through the window. That was all. No grand reconciliation. No tears on each other's shoulders. No moment where everything was forgiven and the credits rolled. Just two women in a hospital waiting room, one of whom had done something she could not take back, and one of whom had told the truth and paid for it, sitting together because a man they both loved was in a bed nearby, and they were going to get through this part the way families do, imperfectly and without a script. I drove home from the hospital that night and I sat in my apartment and I thought about all of it. The dinner with Patris and the number that would not leave me alone. The courthouse and the 31 pages. The kitchen and my father nodding from his chair, the weeks of silence. The cousins and the aunts and the neighbor. The settlement and Patris's tired crying. My mother's careful, circling non-apology on the phone. The hospital and the bad coffee and those two quiet sentences. And I thought I would do it again. Not because it was easy. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it cost me more than I knew it would when I started. But because the alternative was becoming someone who looks at an injustice and decides that their own comfort is worth more than someone else's truth. And I cannot be that person. I have tried to imagine being that person, and I cannot do it. Some truths are expensive. That does not make them wrong. It just makes them true. There is one last thing I want to tell you about, because I think it matters to the full picture of what this experience was and what it left behind. About 6 weeks after my father came home from the hospital, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost did not pick up. When I did, it was Mr. Carver, the elderly lawyer. He said he had tracked down my number through his records. He wanted to speak with me. We talked for about 20 minutes. He was apologetic in his careful, formal, old-fashioned way. He said he had not handled the estate correctly, and that he had allowed himself to be guided in a direction that was not in keeping with his duties. He said he was grateful that the matter had been resolved, but that he felt he owed me a personal acknowledgement because it had been my initial call to him that had, as he put it, made it difficult to pretend I had not already known something was wrong. I sat with that for a moment. He had known something was wrong. He had been uncomfortable when I called because he had already known and had let it happen anyway. I said I appreciated the call. I told him I did not hold it against him. I meant it. He said, "You're a young woman with good judgment and a great deal of courage. I hope you know that." Coming from a semi-retired estate lawyer I had never met in person, that sentence landed more deeply than I expected it to. After I hung up, I thought about courage, whether what I had done was courageous or just stubborn, whether there was much difference between the two when the stakes are real. Whether courage is only courage if it costs you something, and therefore whether every hard, true thing I had done in the previous year qualified. I decided it probably did. Here is where I am now. My father is recovering. It is slow, but he is home and he is okay. I visit once a month. The visits are not like they used to be. There is a carefulness to them that did not exist before, but they are real. My mother makes coffee. My father talks about whatever show he is watching. I stay for a couple of hours and then I drive home. Ray, not the family we were, but we are something. Patris and I had dinner last week. She had a good day at work and she wanted to celebrate and she called me. We sat at a restaurant downtown and split a dessert and talked until the staff started stacking chairs. That is new, that is good. Dennis sent me a birthday message this year. A real one, not just a quick text, a paragraph, that is also new, also good. Diane still comes on Fridays. She has been there through all of it and continues to be there. Some friendships are the ones you are born into, and some friendships are the ones you find. The found ones, I have learned, are sometimes the ones that hold. My work is steady. My life is quiet. My apartment is mine, in a way that feels more complete than it did before, because I am more completely myself inside it. I do not think about the money. I never wanted the money. I was not a beneficiary. I had no stake in the outcome beyond the simple, uncomplicated conviction that Patris and Dennis had been cheated by someone they trusted, and that I was the only person who had seen it and could say something. I said something. It cost me a year of my life, and the easy, uncomplicated version of my family. It gave me something harder to name, but more important to keep. I know who I am now in a way I did not before. I know what I will do when it counts. I know that the truth is worth the price they charge you for it. And I know that being disowned by someone for telling the truth is not the same thing as being wrong. It just means they needed the lie more than they needed you. And once you understand that, once you really let yourself understand it, you can grieve it and release it and walk forward without it. That is what I did. That is what I am still doing. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, holding a truth that feels too expensive to say out loud, I want you to know this. The cost they quote you up front is never the full picture. Because the cost of staying silent, the way it hollows you out slowly, the way it makes you a stranger to yourself over time, that cost does not come with a price tag. It just quietly collects. Pay the first price. Tell the truth. Find out who you actually are on the other side of it. I promise it is worth knowing. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you. Not just a like, though I genuinely appreciate it. I want to know, have you ever been in a position where telling the truth cost you something real? Did you say it or did you stay quiet? And do you regret whichever one you chose? Leave it in the comments. These conversations matter more than you know. And if you know someone who is carrying a hard truth right now and wondering whether it is worth it, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing another person can hear is that someone else already paid the price and survived it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. There are more. There are always more.